All right. I'm Brian MacDonald. I'm the managing editor with the Pragmatic Bookshelf. Anybody heard of the Pragmatic Programmer? Yes, thank you. That's us. So, I'm here today to talk to you about technical book publishing, which is both very similar and yet very different to what most of you do. And the reason that I want to talk to all of you about it is because with the skill sets that you already have, you make excellent candidates for book authors. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process, the similarities and the differences, and I'm going to explain all of that in the context of if you wanted to write a book someday, and I hope that you will consider it. All right. So, street cred slide. This is part of my portfolio. These are books that I have either edited or co-authored. I've been doing this for about 20 years, both as a contractor and in-house employee at various publishers. And I spent about 2 years as a tech writer for Microsoft, so that's given me a pretty good idea of what goes on both sides of the coin. And one of the primary differences that I've noticed is that when you all go to write something, it's normally because you were assigned to do it, either by your boss or through a ticket or a customer request or something like that. When a book author decides to write, they're usually doing it in a vacuum. They're doing it without any assistance, entirely on their own. So it's worth spending a minute to consider, why would I want to do this in the first place? There's a lot of potential motivations, but they fall into three main categories. So the first is what I call the open source reason. You want to share information that you know. There's a brand new JavaScript framework and you're really excited about it and you want to tell people. Or there's some programming technique that you think would be so helpful if people only knew more about it. Or, there's some technology that everybody's been getting wrong all this time and I'm going to show you all right? That all constitutes sharing information. The second reason is what I call the fringe benefits. Thank you. Once you're a published author forever. No one can take that away from you. It looks fantastic on a resume, on a CV. So if you're looking for a promotion or you're looking for a new job, not a bad thing to have in your back pocket. Other possible fringe motivations, everybody you know has written a book and you want to give it a try. It's on your bucket list. Maybe you just like the way the covers look. All perfectly valid motivations. And the third main reason is that you would like to be paid. This is the only time in this talk that I'm going to talk about the money, but what you're doing here is essentially going to be a side project, and you deserve to be compensated for your skill, your effort, and your knowledge. That said, while different publishers do compensate at different levels, none of this is quit your day job money. Nobody gets rich writing technical books except David Pogue, and I don't see him here, so we'll just assume. So everybody who's ever written a book, including myself, has some combination of these three motivations. If you have them in this order, you're most likely to have a positive experience coming out of it. Because at some point, you're going to get stuck, and chapter 6 isn't going to be working. And the motivation to get you through that block is going to be, I need this out there. This book needs to exist in the world, rather than just, I'd like to be paid for this. So keep those three things in mind. All right, so now that we've discussed why we're writing in the first place, a little bit about the major differences. Tech writing is a relatively young profession. It's a relatively young thing. Publishing, on the other hand, is 500 years old. So tech publishing takes the new thing and bolts it onto the old. We've got our own procedures. We've got different techniques. We have our own terminology, some of which is in Latin. But at the core, what we're trying to do is the same. We're trying to bring information to readers. We're trying to educate them. We're trying to help them get stuff done. So the big thing that you need to do when you've started out, if you've decided that you want to write a tech book, you probably have what we technically refer to as an idea. The mistake that authors make at this point is that they think that a noun constitutes an idea. New JavaScript framework, or I'm going to write about this productivity software. So that's a noun. But what we're actually looking to do in the book is to solve a problem. This is something we've already mentioned several times today. The reader has a problem they want to solve and they're looking to you to help. So what you want to do with your idea as you start to refine it, think about what the reader wants to do. Find a verb to go with that noun. Now you've got the core of an idea. So the next step in the pre-writing is to define your audience. All of you consider your audience when you start to write. I know that there's lots of research and personas, and we don't normally go quite that deep. But the mistake that authors make at this point is they'll decide, I want to sell this, so therefore I want my audience to be as broad as possible. I want it to appeal to front-end developers and back-end developers and DevOps people and students and managers, and this is all going off the rails. So we want to bring that back down, bring it in tighter. Of that huge list I just mentioned, front-end developers is certainly a subset. That's still a lot of people. If you're talking about strictly, mobile game developers, that's pretty tight, but it's still a lot of people. So getting authors to rein in their broad expectations and narrow down the audience is the key at this stage. The next thing is the approach, and this highlights one of the really major differences between what you all do and what publishers do. If you think about traditional technical writing, SDK documentation or API documentation, the stuff that comes to mind when people think tech writing, it's exhaustive, it covers all the edge cases. You think of commands and lists of options and maybe some examples. That's all reference content, which is all very well and good. The tech publishing community doesn't really do reference anymore because we can't sell it. And the reason we can't sell it is because all of you have done such a fantastic job documenting these things and then giving it away to your customers for free. So we can't compete. Well done, y'all. Give yourselves a hand. So what we do focus on the other hand, is tutorial content. I've heard lots of people say that you work on tutorial content, and that's fantastic. This is what we found that we can sell. People are willing to pay for if we go at it all in. So I'm talking full Joseph Campbell hero's journey narrative through line. All right, your reader starts at the beginning. They have a problem. They're not self-actualized. They are lacking in resources. They don't know how to get from here to there. They go through a series of discrete steps. In each chapter, they pick up a new skill. It's a step along the path. They get to the end. They can do what it was they wanted to do. They've achieved their goal. Maybe they're even a better person. And what we've found out is that people are willing to pay for good tutorial content that's really well thought out and approachable. All right, last step in this pre-writing, you have to define the scope. So if you're writing about a language, say C++, that's an awfully broad thing that you could write about. Are you going to focus on the beginners? Are you going to focus on the advanced? Are you going to focus on special things, networking or distributed systems or embedded systems? Narrowing it down to each of those, one of those things provides you with the scope. It provides you with a window where your content is going to live. And that's going to make the whole process easier because you know what to leave out. So every time you hear an author say that's beyond the scope of this book, that's because they've defined the window. So these are the 4 things that you want to do during the pre-writing stage. And once you've gotten this far, well, it's time to do some homework, because one of the major differences, again, between what you do and what we do is that you don't have competition, whereas we do. We're trying to sell this stuff, so there's going to be more than one person doing it. Fortunately, there is an excellent tool that exists for doing research for competition when it comes to books. It's called Amazon. Just go there, type in a few keywords, see what exists already in the area that you're thinking about publishing on. There's a couple of possibilities here. You might find that there's a whole lot of competition. Stuff that you are already thinking about. Maybe you find the exact book that you wanted to write, in which case, congrats, you're done. But you probably want to write something yourself. So look for the differentiators. Are you approaching a different audience? Is your scope in a different space? Maybe you're more up to date than the stuff that's already out there. Remember all this stuff because you're going to need it later. The other option that you might find is that there's no competition. And that sounds on the surface like it's a good thing. However, a lack of competition could mean a lack of a market. It could be that this favorite technology that you really wanted to write about, that you've been talking about in a chat room with 50 other people, that's the entire market for this book. So if there's no competition, that doesn't mean you're toast, but have a warning sign. So the next thing you need to do is make an outline. My authors at this point have flashbacks to the 5th grade and they start to panic and they get upset. I'm going to assume that all of you understand the value of an outline and how to make one. I love talking to groups like this. However, as a tip, keep those verbs in mind. Each of these little squiggles should be a task that your reader wants to perform or something that they want to do. Verbs to go with the nouns. All right. I have gone all through all of this pre-writing process and we haven't even talked about the publishers yet. So that's the next step. You want to find one. Fortunately, this task is not as difficult as it used to be. There aren't that many of us left. But to find a publisher that's right for your book, start by looking at, whose books do you have already? What's on your shelf? Maybe if you don't, ask a colleague. What are the publishers that they like? Who do they respect? So that's the beginnings of your short list. Next thing you do, go to the publishers' websites, research their catalogs. See if it's a good fit, your idea. Possibly, there are publishers who specialize in beginner-level content. So if your book is advanced, it might not be a great fit there. If you want to write about, say, machine learning in Python, as an example, see if they've got other Python books on other topics that would fit in nicely. You're looking for a good fit. It's also possible that the publisher doesn't have any books on that type that you're looking for. Sometimes publishers will decide, we're just not into Python. Either we think it's a passing fad or we think somebody else has it locked up, so we're not going to do that. A good research in the catalog will tell you whether your shortlist is a good fit for you or not. So the next thing that you need to do is make a contact, because sadly, even in the 21st century, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. So if you just sit at home being brilliant and waiting for a publisher to find you, you'll be waiting a while. So what you want to find is a person called the acquisitions editor. Hi, you've all found one. Check that off. Well done. The acquisitions editor is the person who goes to conferences, who does research in the community, finds out what topics people might be interested in, and then looks to recruit writers, people to write about them. How do you find one of us if the acquisitions editor is not kind enough to stand up on stage and tell you who he is? Go to a conference, maybe the publisher's got a booth, we might have somebody there, or at least someone who can connect you. We're frequently active on social media, and you should be no hesitation in your mind to approach an acquisitions editor either at a conference or online. Don't be shy about bothering us, because this is literally our job, is to find you. In the event that you absolutely can't find an acquisitions editor with all of your networking tricks, the publishers almost always have what we call a blind proposal alias. It's usually of the form proposals@publishername.com. So there'll be instructions somewhere on the website. This is what we want in a proposal. You put that together and you send it in blind, and then be prepared to wait. Because depending on the size of the publisher, the person answering this mail might be an intern. It might take a while to get to. I do recommend an acquisitions editor if you can work with one. We will iterate with you. We will help you craft the proposal to best effect. So, I've talked about a proposal several times now. So what is this? It's the document that you send to the publisher to say, hey, I think you should take a risk on this, take a risk on me. Proposal normally has 3 parts. The first part is what I technically call the marketing stuff. I said we've got a lot of advanced terminology here. So the marketing stuff, there's a few components to it. First of all, we want to know, is your technology worth taking a risk on? So that brand new JavaScript framework that you've got, can you tell me user numbers on it? If you can't, download numbers, stars or pull requests on GitHub. If you're talking about a language, where is it on the TOB index? There are accountants involved in making this decision, so the amount of hard figures that you can give us is to your benefit. We're also going to want to know about the competition, and fortunately you already did that as part of your pre-writing. So again, you're going to have to tell the publisher, why is your book different? What's that factor that's differentiating? And preferably something a little more concrete than, well, mine's going to be better. It's more up to date. It's approaching a different audience. There have been developments in the technology that I would like to write about. These are good differentiators. And the last thing we're going to want to know is why you? What's your relationship to this content? Is it something you use every day at work, or is it a hobby for you? Is it something that you go to conferences and talk about? Do you talk about it in a podcast or a blog or Stack Overflow? We want to know who's out there that looks to you as an authority on this topic, which is not to say you have to have all of those things before you can even be considered by a publisher. But if you have none of those things, you might want to consider boosting your profile a little bit. Because at the end of this process, you're going to have to promote your book. And you, the author, are the best weapon when it comes to promotion. So having that built-in audience, people who already look to you as knowledgeable in this field, is going to help with the promotion. All right, so that's the first part. Second part is the outline. It's back again. So you've already done that. Well done. A couple of tips for proposing an outline to a publisher, though. I like to see, when I look at an outline, level 1 and 2 headings. Some people like to put in a text description of what's in each chapter. I can go either way with that. But the descriptive headings give us a sense of what's in the book. If you have this plan that involves having clever headings all taken as quotes from 80s sitcoms, it's best to leave that for the book that when you're actually writing it. During this phase, make it as clear as possible so that the publisher can see what happens at each stage of the book. And the last thing we're going to ask for is a sample. Writing samples, it varies from publisher to publisher what we actually ask for. Some of us will say, just show us a blog or something that you've written before. For me, I actually like to see a chapter that's taken from the book you're going to write. And if you're thinking right now, you're going, hey, he's trying to get us to write something on spec. And yes, that is in fact what we're doing. And the reason that we do it is because most of our authors don't have writing experience that you all have. So we want them to try this out, have a dry run. Find out, do I write best in the morning, at night, at home, at the coffee shop? Because if they go through this sample chapter, and I've had this happen, and they say, that was the worst experience of my life, I never want to write again, and they can't see themselves doing it for 10 or 12 chapters. Let's find out now, before we sign the contract, rather than 6 months into the project. So for most of you, this should be gravy, not really a problem. Now, once you've got all of this together, it constitutes a proposal, you send it in, possibly with your acquisitions editor, and it goes to a committee, which sounds scary, but it's really just the editors and some subject matter experts, and they'll consider, is this a good fit for the publisher? And they'll either say yes, or you might get rejected. Don't take it personally. The vast majority of proposals that come in get rejected for one reason or another. There may be factors you're completely unaware of. We may have a book in the works that competes with the one you're proposing, but you didn't know because it's not out yet, so it's not in the catalog. We, again, might have decided that although we've published on this technology in the past, it didn't work for us. We're not interested now. Or maybe everybody in the committee just had a bad day and we rejected everything. So it might not be personal, unless it is. In which case, go back, see, did I follow the instructions? Did I do everything that I was supposed to be doing throughout the process? If you're rejected, you can write to the person who sent the rejection letter and say, hey, could I get a little more detail on what's wrong? Maybe you'll get it, maybe you won't. I'll give you a very polite but brief answer. But you can try again if you want. So let's get away from that and consider the happy path for a minute. So you've been accepted. The first thing that's going to happen is you'll be asked to sign a contract. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to go in depth here, but read your contract. Especially read the parts about copyright and who owns it and for how long. So enough said about that. Next step, find out about the tools you'll be expected to use. If you're talking about a 200-year-old publisher that publishes things other than tech, they probably have their own systems that have worked for them that may or may not involve Microsoft Word. If you have a relatively new publisher by developers for developers, odds are we'll be using similar tools to the ones the developer use. At Pragmatic, we have a content management system. We use Subversion. Other publishers use Git. For how you actually write, we have a custom design markup language that's focused on print, but it's compatible with Markdown. So I'll just tell people, take your favorite text editor, write in Markdown. If there's any changes, let your editor know. So find out what the tools are and find out if you'll have to learn anything new. Then meet your editor. We don't do the thing, any publisher that's worth their money at all is not going to say, okay, you're signed, go away, come back in 6 months with a finished book. We don't do that. You'll have a single point of contact throughout the entire process. Who that is will probably change, and I'm going to run through who all the people are in just a second. But that single point of contact is the person that you need to stay in touch with. There's going to come a point where you miss a deadline because your dog ran away and your kid got sick and it was a whole country music song. Just tell your contact, tell your editor, we have heard everything and we've probably got some techniques for how to catch up or get around it. Not necessarily the sick kid thing, but we'll know how to help you catch up. So, who's who in the process? We've already talked about the acquisitions editor. Hello. That's the person that you met, who helped you with the proposal, who signed you with the contract, and then vanished. Because the honest truth is, while I would love to edit myself, every book that I sign a lot more books than I can edit. So I pass you on to our development editor. If you're lucky, you'll have a development editor. Some publishers do. Other publishers use project editors. But the development editor, if you're not familiar with the term, is going to be the person who reads every word of your book, and they're going to ask questions. They're going to say things like, what if we swap these two sections? Or can we make this intro a bit stronger? Or, a personal favorite, you lost me here, what did you mean? Now, development editors aren't necessarily developers. Some of them are, but not all of them. But we do have experience acting as an audience stand-in, an audience surrogate. So if you lost your development editor, you've probably lost your audience. And they're going to keep asking those questions, and it's going to be a dialogue as you work with the editor. So if you just have a project editor, they're going to do some of the same things as a development editor without reading the book. So they're going to coordinate everybody else on this list, and they're probably going to be your primary point of contact from now until the end of the book. We'll have some technical reviewers as well, subject matter experts. Some companies have one, other companies have lots. We tell them to hit the book hard, run every line of code, test every procedure. And the reason that we do this is let's find out now, because if you find these errors after the book is out, it gets reported on Amazon and nobody wants that. So the tech reviewers are your friends. You don't have to take their word as gospel. Sometimes it's, I have a difference of opinion, but regardless, we need to consider what they say. And then there comes a magic point called production. So you're iterating with your development editor and your technical editors. And this is going to take 6, 9, maybe 12 months, depending on how long it is and how much time you're willing to devote to the process. But there comes a point where the book is feature complete. Everything that you wanted is in there, all the art, all the code. It may not be polished completely, but it's ready to go. So that's where we get to the production milestone. And the big key here is everybody before production cares more about the content than about the presentation. After production, it's the other way around. So the first person that you'll meet in production is probably a copy editor. I'm going to assume you all know what copy editors do. We use technical ones, so they're not, again, programmers themselves, but they're not going to be afraid if you use a code word as a verb in the middle of a sentence. And we'll have a proofreader if you're lucky. Not everybody does that anymore. Through all of this iteration, errors can get introduced or things can get moved around, and the proofreader goes front to back and reads the whole thing to see that it all still makes sense. Layout technicians are involved because even though about 50 to 70% of our product is now in ebooks, we still optimize for print. And while we have scripts that do a lot of the layout for us, the layout technician is the human who comes in and says, all right, let's balance the pages, let's make sure the figures are in the right places, make sure none of the code gets cut off. So we still need them. Next, there's an indexer. Indexers do black magic. Don't worry about the index at all. Just let them do their job, and you'll probably be happy. And then it goes to print. So you're done, right? Well, for a moment, let's take a second to consider all of this. This second stage, after the production line, can take 6, 8, 12 weeks, depending on the length of your book and how many iterations you're going to do. And then the print stage, while we will release the ebook right away, print still involves putting ink on dead trees and putting the dead trees on trucks and shipping them around the country. So that's going to take a while. And that's one of the things that authors tend to be surprised by. I'm done, where is it? And then the last thing that you're going to have to do at this point is promotion. So I mentioned that before. You're the primary weapon when it comes to promotion. What we want you to do is not go out and sell hard. We want you to keep doing the things you were doing. Go on podcasts, write blog articles, speak at conferences, and basically continue helping people. Extend that knowledge. And then once you've helped people, you say, by the way, if you want to learn more, I've got this book. It's the last slide of my talk. And speaking of the last slide, that's where we end. So I hope I've given you some idea of what this process looks like. Maybe you want to do it, maybe I've scared you off. And some idea of how what you already do every day is similar to what we do, but yet the process is different. I'll be around the rest of the conference. If you've got any more questions or if you have a pitch that you'd like me to hear, that's what I'm here for. All right. Thank you very much for your time.